Ever stumbled upon a cluster of mushrooms in the woods and wondered if they were the edible and tasty wild oyster mushrooms? These unique fungi are a favorite among foragers due to their distinctive taste and versatile use in culinary dishes. However, correctly identifying them is crucial to ensure safety. Today, we'll walk you through a step-by-step guide to spotting these gems in the wild. Before we dive into the identification process, remember never to eat a wild mushroom without positively identifying it first. So, what makes wild oyster mushrooms distinctive? Let's break it down. The wild oyster mushroom, or Pleurotus austratus, is a fascinating fungus, and its unique characteristics make it a favorite among mushroom enthusiasts. To identify this mushroom, you'll need to understand its key traits: its shape, color, gills, and spore print. Let's start with the shape. Wild oyster mushrooms have a distinct shell or fan-like form, hence the name oyster. They usually grow in a tiered formation on tree trunks and fallen logs, often forming a beautiful cascade of creamy white or grayish caps. Next, we look at color. The cap color of a wild oyster mushroom can vary greatly. It can range from a soft pale white to a deep grayish brown. It's important to note that the color can also change with the mushroom's age and the weather conditions. Now let's talk about the gills. On the underside of the cap, you'll find the gills. They are white or sometimes cream-colored and run down the short, often stubby stem. This is a key characteristic of the oyster mushroom, the gills extending all the way to the base of the stem. Finally, the spore print. This is a technique used by mycologists to help identify mushrooms. For an oyster mushroom, the spore print is white or lilac gray. To get a spore print, you'll need to place a mature mushroom cap, gills down, on a piece of paper and wait several hours. These key traits, the shell-like shape, the color variations, the gill structure, and the spore print, can all help in the identification of wild oyster mushrooms. But remember, identification should be thorough and careful. If you're ever unsure, it's best to leave the mushroom where it is. With these characteristics in mind, you're already on your way to spotting a wild oyster mushroom. Now that we know what to look for, where and when should we expect to find these mushrooms? Well, wild oyster mushrooms are quite versatile and can be found in various habitats. They particularly favor deciduous trees, often flourishing on fallen logs or dead stumps. More specifically, they have a soft spot for poplar, beech, and oak trees. As for the season, they are typically found during the cooler months, from late fall through to spring. However, in some milder climates, they can sprout all year round. It's important to remember that these mushrooms prefer a moist environment, so after a rain shower would be an opportune time to start your search. Understanding the typical habitats and seasons of wild oyster mushrooms can remarkably enhance your chances of locating them. Remember, patience and persistence are key in the art of foraging. You might not strike gold on your first attempt, but don't be discouraged. Knowing where and when to look can make your mushroom hunting more successful. However, beware of the lookalikes. Some mushrooms can pose as wild oyster mushrooms. Let's delve into a few common culprits. First up, we have the elm oyster. Despite its name, it's not a true oyster mushroom. One key difference lies in the gills. An elm oyster's gills do not run down its stem, unlike the gills of a true wild oyster. Next, we have the angel wing mushroom. It shares a similar white color and growth pattern with our wild oyster. But here's the catch. Its cap is much thinner and more fragile. Lastly, the deadly poisonous destroying angel. It might seem like a far stretch, but its young button stages can be mistaken for oyster mushrooms. Its telltale sign? A white sac-like vulva at the base of the stem. Each of these lookalikes underscores the importance of careful examination and positive identification. Remember, when in doubt, it's better to leave it out. Let's quickly recap what we've learned about identifying wild oyster mushrooms. Remember the unique features: the oyster shape, the white to gray color, and the decurrent gills. They are typically found on dead or dying hardwood trees, especially during cool, rainy seasons. Be wary of lookalikes such as the deadly angel. With this guide, you're equipped to identify wild oyster mushrooms, but always remember the golden rule. Never eat a wild mushroom without positively identifying it first.